Hello, everybody. Welcome to the Multiple Myeloma Warrior of the Month podcast. Um, my name is Noose, and I will kick things off here with some introduction. I work for Polygon Health, the tech platform for the Multiple Myeloma Warriors group. And what we do is we connect patients to researchers and other opportunities for patients. So our goal is to really help optimize the patient journey and to help researchers improve medications and work towards a cure. The purpose of this podcast is to tell the stories of multiple myeloma patients and to help other patients manage and benefit from hearing these stories. And our Multiple Myeloma Warrior of the Month for January is Bobby Ray Jarvis, who has a very interesting story. Bobby, would you like to introduce yourself and maybe give some background about where you're from and your family and so on?
Sure. My name is Bobby Jarvis. I presently live in Titusville, Florida, just a little ways west of the Space Center. Most people know where that is. They don't know where Titusville is. Um, I came here in 1989, December. Born and raised in the mountains of West Virginia. Was a coal miner for approximately 10 years. Um, got laid off due to the things surrounding not wanting to use coal, acid rain, different things. So demand went down, the mines went down. The state to this day suffers from the loss of coal mining. It's really sad, but that brought me to Florida and went to work at the Space Center for a little while. Had some background in explosives, working with nitroglycerin. When I first got laid off in the coal mines, I spent 3 years as a nitroglycerin operator for a government contractor. We made 90% of the government's propellant. Um, I was in the nitroglycerin department. Um, Not a good place to be. Um, but coal mining and then nitroglycerin, and then finally wound up as the deputy sheriff for 24 years after I came to Florida and retired. I'm presently retired. I have wife, two children, um, let's see, wait a minute. I'm gonna get this wrong. Four grandchildren and a great grandchild and a great grandchild on the way. Um,
Congratulations.
so I've been blessed. Um, that's pretty much it on me. Some of the
Excellent.
immediate background.
Yeah. And so, Bobby, from there, I wanted to, transition into, how you got diagnosed. But your diagnosis is quite interesting because you actually don't just have multiple myeloma. You have a couple of other conditions. So maybe let me tee that up and maybe you can talk about how, your health journey began.
Sure. I probably, I doubt if you'll interview anybody else with a story like mine. And I don't say that being prideful. Um, it was actually um, quite unique. September 2017, we had a storm come through. Florida's famous for storms. And the hurricane went up the west coast, but we felt the winds on the east coast. And it blew down my mother's privacy fence, sections of it. I went over to put that back up. Her neighbor in the backyard had pit bulls, and so the fence needed to go back up. And it wasn't damaged, it was just blown over. So my brother-in-law joined in and helped me, and we were pulling the posts out, and they had concrete on them, and we needed to take that concrete off so we could set them with new concrete. And I had a sledgehammer, and I was busting the old concrete off the post. And I just was tired, just no energy, just very fatigued. And it was a task that I could have easily done before without stopping. But I'd swing the hammer 2 or 3 times and I would just be exhausted. And I started questioning, is this the fact I'm getting older? I'm retired. I'm not real active. I hadn't been retired long. And I was like, what's going on here? And I mentioned it to my wife, and she says, honey, maybe you should go to the doctor and just get a general physical. It's close to your birthday. My birthday is September 19th. And she says that way every year at your birthday, you can remember that you should go get your physical. Yeah, I didn't really want to do that. Not a way to celebrate a birthday, but reluctantly I went. Told her what I was there for, told the doctor I just wanted generalized physical, blood work, urine, whatever. So she pulled some labs, and we had a trip planned to go to Idaho. And the initial labs came back, and she said, Mr. Jarvis, your creatinine is really high. Something's going on with the kidneys, and I'm not real alarmed at this point because in Florida, it's easy to get dehydrated, and sometimes dehydration can cause elevated creatinine. So I want you to really take in a lot of fluid for a couple of weeks, and we're going to run these labs again. So that's what we did. Creatinine only went higher. In the meantime, we had flew out to Idaho to see my oldest granddaughter. And while I was there, she called and wanted me to have an ultrasound done. She was looking for possible urine backing up into the kidneys, thinking there might be some blockage in the urethra. And so my granddaughter says, why don't you just go to the hospital where I work and we will get the ultrasound done there. So I went and registered. They did the ultrasound according to the doctor's orders. And during that test, they found a tumor on my left kidney, 1.9 centimeters, about the size of a penny. And immediately, the radiologist read the report and recommended that I do an MRI, but it was clearly renal cell carcinoma. Not a fast growing tumor. As far as kidney cancer is concerned, it was a slow growing tumor. And so it was not like a bunch of red flags going off, but it needed to be, taken care of. So I had the MRI done locally there in Idaho. And I brought those results back to my primary care physician. In the meantime, she had discussed with the nephrologist in her office what was going on. And he recommended that I have a biopsy done at the local hospital to see what's going on with the kidney, because we knew the tumor had nothing to do with creatinine being elevated. So you call it whatever one wants to call it, consciousness, intuition. I don't know how one would look at it, but I didn't feel comfortable doing that at my local hospital. And as you will hear, as I continue my story, you'll find out why. My insurance at that time, I contacted an advocate, told him what was going on, and I said, apparently I have multiple issues. The tumor's not causing the creatinine to go up. I'm not comfortable doing a biopsy at the local hospital. I would like to be referred to Mayo. It's like a one-stop shop. It's like Walmart. They can take care of whatever's going on. And I just felt more comfortable with that for whatever reason. And that's what I did. I contacted Mayo. They looked at the results from ultrasound and from the MRI, and they made me an appointment. I went up and talked to urologist. He said, we'd like to do another MRI. But looking at everything now, it looks like we're going to have to remove that tumor. So while I was in his office, he called a nephrologist and told him what was going on. He said his creatinine's elevated. He has a tumor on his kidney. And, how do you think we should proceed? And the nephrologist said, well, the cancer's got to come off. The tumor's got to be removed. So let's go in. You go in and take that off, get a biopsy, and let's see what it shows. See if we can find out what's going on. So they scheduled a surgery. I went in, had it removed. was in my bed, hospital bed, recovering. I was advised to try to get up and walk as soon as I could. I did. I made a trip around the hall, and hour or so later, I thought I'd make another trip, and I almost didn't make it back to the bed. Best I can remember, I fell into the bed. They came in, checked my blood pressure, and they said, "You're not moving again until you're seen by a doctor." So what had occurred, I'm gonna try to shorten the story because I could talk to you for 3 hours about the diagnosis. Long story short, I had developed a renal pseudoaneurysm. They did the surgery laparoscopically with robotic assist. And when they took that tumor off, turns out they had damaged a blood vessel. Basically had thinned the wall. And during my recovery, or supposed recovery, that thing began to open up. I picture it based on reading my medical records and stuff. It probably started out small. And like water in a pipe, the pressure just kept pushing at the hole and expanding it. So in the beginning, it wasn't that critical, but I hadn't been making any urine, so they decided to roll me down for temporary dialysis. That session never got completed. My blood pressure completely dropped. They rushed me to critical care, and they stabilized me. A team of doctors and nurses managed to get me stable, and they wanted to put me in a medical coma, and they asked my wife to come in and try to speak to me because I was very agitated. And I'll tell you, I had no idea what was going on. I was like, I don't know, already semi-comatose. I can't describe it. I wasn't here. Okay, my 5 senses had left, and I was on autopilot, so to speak. I was breathing and my heart was beating, but I had nothing to do with anything. And my wife said she told me that I needed to calm down. I was upsetting the staff. When she told me that later on in this journey, I laughed. And at that moment, they got me stabilized some way. My blood pressure had dropped. They put in a midline. I wound up with a feeding tube. I was in critical care unit for a while. Then I improved and got moved to ICU. And just when they thought things were going to get better, they got worse. Apparently, the aneurysm opened up larger, and I started bleeding more. I started swelling up inside. My belly looked like it had a basketball inside of it. And the night nurse saw something on the monitor that they had me hooked to, and she immediately called the doctor. And him and my oldest daughter, who was helping my wife there at the hospital, they met in my room about the same time, and he did a paracentesis, which is they just stick a large needle in your side, and he started pulling out the fluid. And as he was pulling out the old blood and the fluid, a nurse was pumping fluid in another line that they had somewhere stuck in an artery. And he was drawing blood out as fast as she could pump it in. And it got to the point where it became futile to give me any more blood. So they realized that I had a serious internal bleed, and they rushed me down to the surgery again. And an IR, interventional radiologist, went in and found 3 bleeds and cauterized them. I was returned to my room after that, and they had a bag of drain, still draining off blood. I formed hematomas because I had lost so much blood. And so I had these swollen spots under my skin in different places. And the bag was showing mixed fluid. They couldn't tell because there was old drainage and old blood coming out into the bag. They couldn't look at it and specifically say that I was still bleeding. But on the side of caution, they told my wife, they said, we can't tell if he's still bleeding or not. And we don't know by looking at the bag if it's still fresh. So there's a shot that we can give him, medication, and it will cause blood clot. It will cause his blood to clot. And before that, they had already gave me a 50-50 chance. The ICU doctor told my daughter he had looked up medical journal cases and whatnot, and 3 people in the world had survived what I had just came through. And the outlook wasn't good. So they called the family in. They didn't think I was going to make it. People came from Kentucky, West Virginia, Idaho, to see me alive for the last time. And I'm sorry. I get
No, take your time. Take your time.
emotional when I recall. It's like I'm living it again. And turned out the shot worked in my favor. The chances, of course, a clot could form somewhere it should not form, and it could have been my death. But there was a higher power looking after me. I survived it. I slowly began to recover. And I wound up 22 days there in a hospital, followed by 14 days in nearby rehabilitation center close to Mayo Clinic in Jacksonville. And it was a very rough way to get diagnosed. They did get their sample when they was in there, and things began to unfold while I was recovering in rehab. They were getting back test results, and they learned from the biopsy of the kidney and the tumor itself. They learned that I had multiple myeloma. I had a I'll read you right here quickly. AL amyloidosis, multiple myeloma, bone marrow biopsy showed 20% plasma restriction of marrow space, consistent with plasma cell myeloma. Kappa-free light chains were at 137. When I came out of rehab and got home, all of this information was being gathered. The diagnosis was being completed, and they called me up for an appointment to come in and talk to. I was at that point turned over to hematology oncology. And they called me in to discuss the trauma I had just been through, what they found, and how they wanted to proceed with treatment. So my diagnosis came real close to costing me my life. So that was how I got started.
No, I mean, thank you for walking through that, and I'm sorry that you had to relive it, but thanks to God you're here, and you're with us, and you made it through. So we have to be thankful for that.
Yes, I'm very thankful. I forgot to mention the bleeding was from a Factor X deficiency.
Right.
It's part of the blood that causes a normal person to clot. And what's still a mystery to me, is why my INR pre-surgery didn't show that. That's a question I'm still trying to find an answer to. So my clotting factor, normal range, I think, is supposed to be like 107 to 150 percentage. I was at 7.
Wow.
So that's why I nearly bled to death, and that's why the problem was exacerbated like it was, and the difficulty in controlling everything, and the bleeding caused hemorrhagic shock, and that caused ultimately the loss of both kidneys.
Got it.
So sorry to interrupt that, but
oh, no worries. And so just to summarize, you had 3 conditions basically. You had the multiple myeloma diagnosis, you had the AL amyloidosis diagnosis, and then you had the Factor X deficiency, and all of these things were working against you that led you to that point, correct?
Correct. And all three is very rare, as you well know. In some of my research, I wrote a book. I think I sent him a picture of the cover, but I wrote a book about my journey. It was so incredible. I just felt impressed to share it before I even found out about the multiple myeloma community. I was working on this book and researching my medical records and trying to find out what had happened. And see, just like that, I lost my train of thought. Oh, and I found statistics that multiple myeloma, there's like the American Cancer Society estimated that in 2023 there would be like 35,000 cases diagnosed.
That's right.
Out of those, approximately 12,590 would die, and 20-some thousand would survive. And that, of course, had no statistic because, you know, depending on the patient's diagnosis, where they're at, what's going on, their treatment, and how they respond. You're quite familiar with all of that. You could not put an estimate on the survival rate of those 20-some thousand. Then you go down to AL amyloidosis. There's about 4,000 cases a year diagnosed. It's very rare. It's more rare than multiple myeloma. And then when you look at Factor X deficiency, it's genetic or acquired. Genetic, your chances are 1 in 500,000 to 2 million. Acquired, which was mine, which is what I had, acquired Factor X. It was from the cancer. The Factor 10 part of our blood that does the clotting actually attached itself to the amyloid, which is protein and fiber. And that disease, I mean, that factor is even more rare than multiple myeloma or the amyloidosis. So I don't know how I got 3. I don't know if that means I should play the lottery or maybe I should stay away from it.
Well, I mean, those are astronomical odds, and you made it through, and we're so glad that you're able to share the story. And we will, you know, show your book, and hopefully others can benefit from that book as well. Is there anything in particular about the book you want to give a plug about?
Well, you just have to read it. And I'm not trying to propose that as a commercial. But to try to summarize that book, we'd be here all day.
Understood.
I just felt led to write it.
Yeah.
I worked on it for, I don't know, a couple of years. It took me a while to get chemo brain cleared up enough to even start looking into my medical records and trying to sort out what I had been through. Several times I quit. I started doing it on an iPad, and I lost all the notes. And lost my writing. And then I decided, you know, well, maybe I shouldn't do it. And then I'm like, no, I had a burden to write it. I'm just going to be honest. I had a burden to write it. I looked back and I thought, you know, it would help other people. And going through this, that's something the disease has done in my heart that is unexplainable. I have a deep desire to help others along. It's my responsibility to lend a hand and to pull them through what I went through, feeling like I was alone. You've probably already came to understand people with this disease. Nobody understands us except somebody else that has the disease.
Understood.
And I just had to write the book. I bought a laptop and bought Microsoft Word, and I started writing again and just kept working on it. I would stop for a couple of months because I was tired, days I just didn't feel like it. And so picked it back up and kept writing until I finally completed it and got it published.
No, that's fantastic, and people will definitely benefit from it. So we appreciate you doing that. So now that you walked us through that, in terms of the diagnosis, what was the prognosis at that point? What sort of regimen did they put you on, and what did they psychologically prepare you for it after
Well,
giving you.
that's, I walked into the doctor's office for that appointment, and some of my close family members, my wife, my daughter, my sister, brother-in-law, everybody was anxious to learn what was going on, what had happened to me and where was we going. And like anybody else, I just thought, it's something they're going to give me a little bit of medicine for and I'm fine. Well, the doctor walked in and started explaining everything and told me what I had. He says, you've got amyloidosis and we suspicion that you have multiple myeloma, but we can't diagnose that until we do a bone marrow biopsy. And he says, we're going to schedule that. But he said, right now, based on what I feel and what I believe, he says, you've got approximately 5 to 7 years to live, depending on how you respond to treatment. And then he's probably seen the expression on my face and everybody else's face. And he says, you have cancer, a rare form. And he says, but I've had some patients that have lived with this disease for 26 years and they're not even on treatment anymore. And, that calmed me down for about 5 seconds. And then I looked at him and I said, okay, stage 3, my familiarity with people with cancer. Stage 4, you're checking out, or it's very, very serious. And I said, so what's my prognosis? And he said, I'll give you 5 to 7 years, depending on how you respond to treatment. Well, March, or well, I should say April, the surgery was late March, will be 6 years. And I'll continue to improve. I think I'm going to beat the 7 years.
That's fantastic. That is absolutely fantastic. Okay, very good. So in terms of medications, what did they put you on right away and what did or did not work for you?
Here's what he said. He said, the medication that I want to start you on right now without the bone marrow biopsy results is Velcade. And he says, it is a good medication for both amyloidosis and multiple myeloma. And he says, I want to start you on that as soon as I can, even before we do the bone marrow biopsy. And he said, that's where we'll begin. So they scheduled me for Velcade. At that time, it was infusion. I had to go and have IV and sit down and watch the drip, the endless drip. The first treatment took like 3 hours because they did it real slow. They wanted to watch for responses, negative responses. And then May the 24th, they added Sabra-D to the Velcade. That started May 24th, 2018. And I'm looking at my notes. I completed 9 cycles of Sabra-D and 3 cycles of Velcade. And that got interrupted I don't know if you know the process, you probably do, but they do 8 weeks of every week, and then they do 8 weeks of every other week, and then it's once a month. Before I completed a year cycle, I was just a month or so away from it. I went into seizures. I had a 2-week bout of seizures. I didn't know where I was at. Didn't know anything that was going on. It's probably one of the most horrible things I ever experienced in my life. And they finally got me through that. I was hospitalized, out of my mind, and they got me stabilized. And the only conclusion they could come to, because of kidney failure, I was on dialysis. And they felt like possibly I had a buildup from the chemo treatments and the medication, because dialysis wasn't doing a real good job at cleaning me out. They felt that I had built up toxic levels from the treatments. And so they stopped treatment for a month or so and let me recover from that 2 weeks of seizure trauma. And then they started me back on June 24th, 2019. they started me on Dara by itself. And I did the complete cycle again, 8 weeks every week, 8 weeks every other week, and once a month. Well, that got interrupted in February 2020 with another week-long bout of seizures. Out of my mind again, didn't know where I was at, what was going on, checked out. It's the only way I can describe it. I stopped treatment in February, stopped treatment again, February 2020, and they brought me in once a month for Velcade, just for maintenance, to keep to not lose ground, the progress I had made, because I had came from 137 light chains down to 62 on the Cyber D and the Velcade. So, and then the Dara combined had brought me down to that. And actually, let me look at my notes again, because I might have, when they started me on the Dara, 8, every week and then every other week. The first week of those treatments, I had dropped to 15.7 on the light chains. Dara dropped me like a rock when they took me off of Cyber D and Velcade and put me on Dara by itself. My numbers started dropping like a rock. You'll see that on the graph. And what I'm telling you probably goes along with the graph. And it just started changing the whole game. And then I pretty much leveled out, as you can see on the graph. I just like went across for a couple of years. And after those, after that last set of seizures, they were sort of stumped on what to do. He called me in and we started discussing it. And I said, he says, we got to start treatment back up. He said, what would you like to do? He said, well, you want to do the complete cycle again? Speaking of Dara. And I said, to be honest, I said, I feel like if I do that, every week for 8 weeks, every other week for 8 weeks, that I'm just going to wind up in seizures again, because this just isn't working. And I said, I'm going to be honest with you at this point. At that juncture, I said, let's do once a month and see what happens. And he said, I'm comfortable with that. And I said, well, my feeling is that if I do the complete cycle, I'm going to go back into seizures, and I don't want to go through that again. And I said, we'll do once a month and monitor my progress and see how it goes. And he said, that's your choice. And I'm good with that, because I'll be honest, I have pretty much given up at that juncture. I said, if once a month don't work, then I'll just make the funeral arrangements and forget this whole process. So that's the medication. Treatment cycle lasted, as you can see from the graph. I went into remission. I'll never forget that day when I was called in September of 2021, and I met with what they call the dream team. It was hematology, nephrology, and cardiology, because I had some heart activity on the amyloidosis, as well as losing my kidneys. And he says, have you had your September treatment? I said, no, sir. He said, well, you're not going to get it. And I actually thought, okay, this is the end of the road. That's it. And he says, you're in remission. He said, we're going to order tests again. We're going to do labs. We're going to do another bone marrow biopsy. And if everything comes back the way we anticipate it to come back, he says, I'm going to transfer you to the transplant team. How do you feel about a kidney transplant? I said, can we do it next week? And of course, he just laughed. And that was a breakthrough.
That's fantastic.
That was a breakthrough.
That must have been the best words you've ever heard, that you were in remission.
Yeah, after 3.5 years of dialysis, at home. And through that whole time, I had a nephrologist at the dialysis center telling me, dialysis is a bridge to a kidney. It's not going to last forever. I was fighting a disease, not knowing how the treatment was going to go. And it was like I was being stalked by two monsters of death. And I would sit a lot of times and say, what's going to kill me first, dialysis or this disease? And once I got the disease resolved and got into remission, then I was facing needing a kidney, which I was told for 3.5 years would never happen. And miraculously, it worked out.
So how long between that meeting and you getting a kidney took place?
Oh, gosh, that's another crazy story. It took a year. They turned me over to the transplant team, and they looked at all of my records, and I was ready to go, except for one of the tests showed that my gallbladder was full of bile and stones and sludge and whatever else. I guess it should be expected at 60 some years old. And they would not consider me and qualify me for the transplant till the gallbladder was removed. So they scheduled that surgery. I'm like, sure, whatever it takes. Scheduled that surgery. They removed the gallbladder. It was a 2-part thing. They pushed the stones out first, and then the next day they took out the gallbladder laparoscopically, and that turned into some complications. Being on peritoneal dialysis, excuse me, the fluid and the surgery together somehow got mixed, is my theory, and I wound up with an infection. So I was hospitalized again for a week with antibiotics, battling that infection. Peritonitis, it's pretty common with dialysis patients, and got that cleared up, and we started proceeding forward again, running all their tests. And I'll never forget when that phone call came. Mr. Jarvis, we're good with putting you on the transplant list. You're now qualified to be the recipient of a kidney. And at that juncture, we were looking at possibly 3 years before I would get a transplant. But that changed.
Wow. Wow, absolutely. How was this sort of emotional journey for you? I mean, you described it all, but if you had to let people know who are, starting this or in the middle of it, you reached the end of, hopefully the journey, it doesn't, change, but, you've had a successful arc to your story. What would you, say about the emotional journey for folks at any point along the way? How would you help them cope with it?
The first thing they need to do if they're freshly diagnosed, my recommendation is to take the word can't and quit out of their mind. Because you can't stop treatment and you can't quit. No matter what it throws at you, no matter what happens, no matter what comes your way, stay with your doctors, stay with your treatment, stay with their advice. If you're at a center of excellence, I might add, that is the most important thing in my mind, is to be with doctors who know this disease, have treated this disease, are experienced in this disease. That is key. The emotional side, it's something you have to deal with every day. The biggest help, and this was one of my mistakes, the biggest help is to get with some of these groups, get with some of these forums. I'm on the Multiple Myeloma Warrior Community Forum. I'm on AL Amyloidosis Forum. I'm on Kidney Transplant Before and After Forum. So a lot of times I spend a lot of hours on those forums trying to help other people, encourage them, inspire them, give them hope, let them know what I went through, what I experienced, and try to help them along. It was 22 months before I discovered these groups. So for 22 months, I was isolated. All I had was the short meetings with the medical staff, and had very little with bad hearing. I couldn't hear a lot of what they were telling me. With chemo brain, none of it made any sense anyway. Um, my wife was my interpreter. She listened to most everything and tried to explain to me what took place in the exam room when we left each appointment. And but these forums, I'm going to be honest, we're not doctors. None of us are doctors. And as a rule of thumb, we try to let people know you need to make sure you check with your doctor, but this is what happened to me. This is what I did. This is what I was on. Uh, like people all the time asking questions about SCT. Um, that's something that each patient have to determine with their doctor based on the progression of their disease and decide for themselves. Um, my advice at this point, I couldn't do SCT because of complete kidney failure. But my advice to people would be, proceed cautiously with that. Some treatment centers are abandoning SCT in favor of Dara because it's had such good results. And it had good results for me.
It did, absolutely. And another name for Dara is Darzalex, and SCT is stem cell therapy. Transplant.
Yes.
That's right. So that's excellent advice. I think the Multiple Myeloma Warriors group is the most engaged and largest patient group that I've ever seen, and that's why, we partnered together. And Alan Stevenson, the moderator, founder of that group, a close friend of yours and mine, is just doing wonders there. And for you to have waited, 20 some odd months to have found that group, if folks can just get connected with other peers and centers of excellence, that's another thing that Alan stresses a lot, is that get connected to that center of excellence. Do not just stay with your local oncologist. They don't have the tools or resources to put the full team together and the brains to really understand your condition at the highest level and have seen other people with your condition. Is there anything you want to stress once more about that, Bobby?
No, I agree with everything you said. What happens a lot of times with patients, it happened with me. You go in and you spend a quick 15 or 20 minutes with your, in my case, APRNs took over after treatment started, and you get a rundown. I was focused on chains, light chains, and then the ratio, the FLC, and those numbers, as long as they were low, and my APRN says, "Hey, you're doing great." That was pretty much it. I was just like following along blindly. I didn't give myself a lot of hope based on my diagnosis, and I was just rolling with the punches. But when you get into these forums and start learning of other people's experiences, their treatments, what they went through, their medication, how things worked for them, it's an invaluable source of information. It's not a substitute for your doctor, but it's definitely a tool that I highly recommend.
Absolutely, absolutely. Yeah, you can never know enough, right? So helping with getting the medical records, getting your, peers, and seeing what their regimens are, what's working for them. For example, Darzalex has done wonders for you, and just hearing that story so that these conversations can take place with the care teams. All of this is critical pieces of puzzle, for folks to put together, and everybody's puzzle is unique in their own way.
It is, and the support groups are invaluable. For me, I'm a man of faith. The church family and fellow Christians and their prayers and their support and their encouragement is invaluable. The family, your immediate family, is invaluable. They're the ones closest to you, and they're all in their own way support groups. They're support people. And I think the worst thing you can do is isolate yourself when you have a disease like this or any kind of disease. The worst thing you can do is isolate yourself. You need to be open and circle yourself with others And that encouragement and that friendship and that fellowship is important, very important.
Absolutely. Do you want to give a little shout out to the care team, the Center of Excellence, and any specific, staff that folks that might be in the Florida area, would benefit from?
I treated at Mayo Clinic in Jacksonville. Just so happens they are a center of excellence for this disease. They have even done clinicals on new drugs and development. I remember it was funny or strange. I was talking to my APRN at one of my appointments, and I said, what about CAEL 101 that they're experimenting with? And she didn't know what I was talking about. And so she went to the head of the department there, because they're a team. And she asks about, a patient wants to know about CAEL 101. Well, it just so happened, not to her knowledge, they were doing a clinical on that drug. It's specifically for amyloidosis. And it's a hopeful drug. It not only stops the production of the amyloid in its tracks, but it actually starts removing it from the affected organs. And if that is continuing, to develop and it looks promising, and if FDA gets approval, I could be looking at that down the road. So she got back to me and she goes, "Oh, by the way, we're doing clinicals on that." So a shout out to them. They're on the cutting edge of stuff that's going on. They do clinicals on drugs. They're very professional, very compassionate. I had a couple of APRNs that I would see at different times. Most of the time I saw Victoria Allegria. She has since left the multiple myeloma and amyloidosis section, and she's now with CAR T research. That's where her heart was. And Jamie Elliott, my other APRN, was telling me that's where Victoria went, and that's where she's happy, because her heart was always there with CAR T research. Dr. Alwadi was my hematologist oncologist, but I looked through as I was writing my book. I looked through some stats from the Mayo website where I can message my doctors. I have 53 doctors that I've seen involved in my case, and that's not counting their team members. And nurses, I couldn't begin to count. Lab technicians, gosh, if I'd have kept track of all of this, it would have probably been amazing. Just like the needle sticks would probably be amazing. I told someone on the forum, if I had as many needles sticking out of me as I've had stuck in me, I'd look like a 6-foot porcupine.
Got it. Got it. Wow, interesting. So yeah, this is a good the CAR T plug. We're actually doing a research study right now. Anybody that has taken CAR T, please click the link above. Abecma Carvykti. There's active research going on underway for multiple myeloma CAR T. So please take advantage of that as well. So thank you for that, Bobby. So Bobby, you mentioned along the way some of sort of the mistakes and best practices. Do you want to sort of summarize, things that you could have done better as you look, in overall this whole journey? And what are the best practices? We mentioned some of them, like going to a center of excellence, but maybe just thinking about things you got wrong and things you got right, and letting people know.
Things I got wrong was not learning quick enough what was going on with the disease, educating myself. To be honest, I was so fatigued mentally, emotionally, and every other way that I didn't even want to dig into it. I spent my days thinking I was doomed, and that wasn't the case. So my biggest mistake was not gleaning knowledge and trying to understand what was going on with me. And my advice to others along those lines is knowledge is power. Educate yourself. Don't lean completely on your doctors. You need to be able to tell them what's going on in your body. They're not in your body. And if you educate yourself on what you're fighting, if you know your enemy, you can help assist your medical team with your care. To me, that's very important.
Perfect, perfect. Let's see here. What is the key takeaway that you would sort of want to end on and just let people know, like, this is the, if you take nothing away from the story, what is the most important thing you want people to take away from your journey?
Key takeaway: never give up.
Absolutely, absolutely. Were there points that you did want to?
Sir?
I said no. I'm saying,
Pardon?
were there points that you did want to, and you're so glad you didn't?
Well, if you will study the disease and get on these forums and educate yourself, I think it would play a role in not giving up. Because there's people with stories crazier than mine, as crazy as mine sounded. Talking with my oncologist on my last visit in September for checkup, she was telling me about a lady that just reached into her back seat to get her purse. She was in the driver's seat and broke her arm. The multiple myeloma, the damage it does to the bones. I sort of put it this way: it's like a car. Your bones is your frame, and without the frame, the car couldn't have a body. And the bones, without the bones being our frame, our body's not supported. And when that multiple myeloma attacks that frame, it causes all kind of havoc. I feel blessed that the multiple myeloma hasn't attacked me any worse than it has as far as bone damage. But speaking with my doctor on my APRN, she says multiple myeloma and amyloidosis. I was asking her, which one is the worst? And in my case, which one is primary and which one is secondary? She said neither. She said they're both monsters that are living in your body, and either one could rear its head at any time and wreak havoc. And I equated that to when I made nitroglycerin. You combine nitric acid with animal fats, which is glycerin, and it's like two men in a bar that hate each other, and they're drinking, and neither one wants to leave, but if the wrong thing happens, they explode. So I don't know if that answered your question, but
It did.
God answers prayers. Never lose hope. There's ongoing research. Someday, our hope is that they'll find a cure. I look at Alan and the forum, myself and others who are involving themselves in research and whatnot as pioneers. We're trying to plow the way so that other people don't have to go through this.
That's exactly right. And with that, couldn't have said it better myself. Let's end on that note. Bobby, we really, really appreciate you being the Warrior of the Month and, sharing your story. People should download Bobby's book. And Bobby, maybe you can share your contact information if people want to get in touch with you.
Yes, I think you have my email address. That stands for West Virginia Mountaineer. 1955 is my birth year. And it's at Gmail, WVMTN1955 @Gmail. And they can also find me on the Myeloma Warrior community. I'm quite active. I'm always trying to encourage people. Alan encouraged me to put my book on there. He's provided a couple of times. It gets buried, in threads and comments, but I've sort of not pushed it based on the holidays. It just got released in November. So now that the holidays are over and things are moving on, then we'll probably start making it a little more known on the forum. I appreciate anything that you do to promote it. I think it would help people to read about my journey and my story. I think it would definitely inspire them and give them hope. If I came through it, they can too.
Absolutely, absolutely. With that, thank you so much, Bobby, Ray Jarvis, and we'll see you guys on the next Multiple Myeloma Warrior of the Month podcast.
I
Thank you.
appreciate your time, and I probably went over my time, so
You
I
did.
apologize.
Okay. Bye, everybody.